Right, guys, I think we are live. So, yeah, just an update really. Um, what have I been printing? Not a huge amount because it's kind of summertime. Well, September summer. Never seen butterflies in September before, but there you go. So yeah, more bushies basically. Just some tips and tricks, Fusion 360. Sometimes you want to re-edit something you've already extruded, and often it's difficult to find out how to do that. You'd think just by double clicking on something it would get in there, or right clicking on something. But no, what you need to do is come down to your sketches and come back here and double click on the sketch. Try that again. Double click on the sketch so it takes you down to the rudiments or the basics of how you started, and then come into the actual, in this case, two circles that I drew, and double click within where the your constraints, as they call these, or your dimensions value for D1. You'd think these would be called out somewhere in here, but they're not. Um, sometimes I find Fusion 360 a little bit non-intuitive, but once you learn the tricks or the ropes, it's not so bad. So you go and measure. Obviously, you'd measure this with if you're looking for your dimensions. When I'm finding I'm printing in TPU, like I know, for example, the shaft diameter for my RC boat is 2.5-ish millimeters. Yet for TPU, you're going to need a bush of about 3.4, which is almost, a millimeter greater. Now you may say why that is. Well, because TPU tends to have a shrinkage. Um, and also it's not always linear, as in it's not always, the walls aren't always completely straight, because TPU is quite soft and malleable. When you print such small objects out, it tends to be very noticeable. So when you end up sending this off to Cura, so I'll finish the sketch. I'll say I'm going to 3D print it. And if you're not used to setting up 3D printing, it's very easy. Come down to the application, down the bottom here, click on that little folder, go and locate program files and your version of Ultimaker that you want to use, or Prusa, or whatever it is, Slicer, and just select the main program, right? And then this will be configured to put the three-dimensional output. By clicking on it, you can see it will create the three-dimensional output slice. Well, effectively it's sliced into all these little triangles and stuff. And then you would just say OK. And then that'll fire up Cura or whatever slicer that you're using. So I've got 4.71 Cura from Ultimaker. I have left the material as PLA, and the reason I've done that is because I know the settings that my printer requires for PLA. So I know, for example, an average layer height 0.25, always the nozzle thickness is set. The wall thickness really doesn't seem to matter. So if I set the wall thickness as 1, so much on TPU, but set the top bottom thickness to, in fact, these could probably be set, come to think of it, to 1, because what's going to do the work for the TPU is the infill. All right. You could play around with concentric because it's a circle effectively, but it doesn't seem to make a huge difference when you've got such a small object. And then the print speed is critical for TPU. You don't want it too fast and you don't want it too slow. So 45 is a good speed. Temperature is also important. My TPU seems to like around 220, so it's fluid, but not, because if it's too cool, it ain't gonna flow. Build plate temperature around 60, flow rate around 102. I usually go for a brim because I want it to be reasonably well stuck, of say 3 counts. And that's about it, really, I would say. And then slice that puppy up. Have a little preview of it just to make sure the infill. So that's what the infill looks like. So that doesn't look really how I want it, to be honest. Probably because I've left the wall count as 1, so it's doing this. So let's try. In fact, I probably do need a wall count of 2. Let's go for a wall count of 2 and see what the difference is like. Slice it, and again we'll preview it. Yeah, slight difference, as you can see, the way that it's filled in. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. If I up the wall count to 3, but left the infill at 0, would I simply get a concentric ring, which would be ideal, wouldn't it? And the answer is probably not. Yeah, I thought so. For some reason, it doesn't seem to do that. So the infill is still important because you wouldn't want hollow walls. If this is a bush, you want it to be fairly solid. So that will print okay now. Yeah, so I would say that 4.71 of Cura looks to be quite good in terms of its rendering. A bit faster to load, perhaps. I haven't looked at all the differences between the old and new. They keep revising it. I am still playing around with both the Prusa Slicer and the Ultimaker. I suppose what Ultimaker gives you, Cura gives you over and above what Prusa will give you is the multitude of settings that you get, which you reveal by going down to we can say manage visibility setting, I suppose. It'll get us into where we need to get. You've got so many variables in here that you can play with. What I do like is some of these experimental settings that you can play with under here, because some of those are quite useful, especially if you're doing thin wall printing. Some of the 3D lab stuff pretty much requires Cura to get thin wall printing to work. Obviously, they tend to recommend Simplify 3D, but you don't need to pay for software because Cura will do it. Simplify 3D, as I previously mentioned, is very, very good, but who wants to pay money for a slicer when there's plenty of slicers out there in the marketplace that will do the job once you know what you're doing. But as an if you're coming into this as a beginner or an amateur, you soon learn this over a period of 3 months. You get the rudiments. All right, thanks for listening.